Good afternoon, preppers. Welcome to our next edition of Goshen Prepping. When it comes to prepping and preparedness, I like to dispel myths. In this particular case, there's been a lot of talk recently about how cattle, and pigs and stuff are going to be or possibly introduced with mRNA vaccines in Missouri. They're up in arms about this. And I'm not here to actually try to take sides on that situation. I think most people already have their own viewpoint. But what I want to do is talk about the real ramifications, because what I've seen are lots of YouTube videos coming out, lots of prepper videos who are saying they're trying to all give us the vaccine through this mechanism. I want to show you quickly how viruses work and vaccines work, because I'm a doctor and a scientist and I understand these things really well, but I'm also try to stay unbiased, try to give you the true facts about it and let you make the decision. All right, so first off, to understand viruses, let me kind of show you a couple cells. Here's the first cell. It's a snowman. This is one of your cells. You're a snowman, apparently. Maybe you're Olaf. And this would be, well, obviously this giant master padlock on here is simply just a receptor. To understand how this works, as an example, by the way, let's say you actually eat some food with some glucose in it, some carbohydrates. And for your cell to get those carbohydrates, to get that glucose, you have to tell the cell, hey, by the way, there's glucose out here. Okay? So what happens is every time you actually eat some glucose, here comes the glucose, and the glucose comes over and says, hey, cell glucose, hello. You actually have to initiate the receptor. In this case, the receptor is actually, that's going to trigger is insulin. So here's an insulin molecule, and it's a key, obviously, that fits this master lock and unlocks it. And when it does, it simply just signals to the cell and say, hey, by the way, cell, there's some glucose out here, munch away. And sure enough, the cell will. It'll munch away on this. But when it comes to receptor models, and understand we have a ridiculous amount of receptors on practically every one of our cells has multiple receptors. That's their way of bringing things in. So when it comes to viruses, and we'll just go ahead and say a virus in general, it doesn't have to be specifically COVID, but in this case, look, here is a virus with that receptor on there. Look at that. Now, that receptor is simply just called a spike protein, and there's not just one, there's a whole bunch of them around there. Now, I do want to look at as far as the size of these, because this is definitely not in comparison as far as the real size goes. Our cells, the snowman cells, are massive compared to viruses. You'll see it's already bigger, but I mean, this would actually be like almost the size of a pencil lead compared to this cell here, would be a better comparison. So what happens with a virus is this. A virus itself is actually just dead. It's just a shell, a protein encapsulated cell with this little protein on top, and it just floats around arbitrarily and randomly will hit one of your cells, clink, and if it's actually the right type of receptor, we'll unlock it, and our cell will be like, oh, look, here's something I need, and we'll take in that virus. Once that happens, that cell is now an enemy because it is completely changed from being whatever that cell does, and now turns it into it's a virus-making factory. And depending on the virus, it'll produce hundreds, if not thousands of more viruses. Sometimes it'll rupture the cell, sometimes it just leaks them out. But this cell will now literally kill you because it releases so many of the actual viruses, which will infect thousands more cells, and then thousands times that, then thousands times that, and next thing you know, you're dead. So we have our immune system will come through, find these cells, by the way, and make it so, we need to actually kill these cells that have been infected. Not to mention, we actually have ways our immune system will block these padlocks so they actually can't take in the viruses. We actually have our immune system, which looks for these specific keys to make sure it doesn't work. There's all kinds of ways our immune system does this, and it's actually pretty amazing how it works. Now, just FYI, COVID itself affects what's called the ACE2 receptors, angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors, and that's how it gets inside our cells, specifically in places like the heart and also reproductive organs and stuff, and that's actually where COVID targets. Okay, so with that in mind, if we want to find a way to make it so our cells won't take in the viruses, well, maybe we need to find a way to get rid of the viruses out of our bloodstream in the first place, or simply just heighten our immune system, because the immune system, again, works well. So if we can kind of tell the immune system what to do, well, that would actually be pretty cool. In other words, like a pre-alert. In other words, a vaccine. So what we do, there's a whole bunch of ways we can do this, by the way. So we can actually take the virus, we can actually scrape off the shell that actually contains the bad parts, the DNA or RNA that's inside there that's going to cause the factory. So if we actually take that out and now it suddenly takes it in, it's not going to make more viruses, but it's still there. Kind of like it's what's called an attenuated virus. Or sometimes we can actually just break off this little protein that actually looks like a key. We flood your bloodstream full of these keys, and your immune system says, hey, look, here's a foreign substance in our body. Let's go ahead and actually just find ways to block this, and therefore you can't actually, the keys will be rendered useless. Unfortunately, sometimes these keys are way too small to make that happen. For certain viruses, for certain diseases, we can do this. We simply just put these little keys in the bloodstream, and it works great. But for other ones, that doesn't quite work. So what do? Let's go ahead and talk about quickly how DNA works and how we actually make the proteins in the first place before I actually go on to the next step. It was actually long time argued, do our proteins make DNA or does our DNA make proteins? Now we know DNA makes proteins. And we start off with your DNA, and DNA is found in every single one of the cells of your body. Well, almost every cell, by the way. To make a protein, first, your DNA has to make RNA. And there's a few different types. We're not going to get into details about that. We'll simply just generically say RNA. Then the RNA will put together these units called amino acids, lock them all together into a very complex strand called a protein. So ultimately, your DNA makes proteins. That's the way it works. And a quick example would be, even like this lock that actually is a receptor is just a protein. Proteins really are the key to life, and they control and regulate everything. Think of it this way. The DNA is kind of like the CEO of the company, and the CEO has a place to make copies, has the copy room up there. The CEO doesn't go out and do work at all. DNA doesn't really do anything. All it does is makes the proteins, then the proteins carry out all the actions of your body. Proteins are the key to life. You have to have the proteins to make everything work. The DNA just tells the proteins what to do. Or realistically, the DNA makes the proteins via RNA. So sometimes we actually make the proteins, and the proteins will float through your bloodstream and elicit immune response. Then somebody had the bright idea, instead of actually just making the proteins to elicit an immune response, why don't we actually inject RNA into the people? The RNA will then make the proteins, start the immune response, and off we go. The specific type of RNA we use is called mRNA. It stands for messenger RNA, by the way. It's just a messenger that carries the process from the DNA to proteins. But that's exactly what the COVID vaccine is. It's an mRNA vaccine. And there's a lot of people who argue and say, well, the mRNA vaccine is not a vaccine at all. No, it really is. It is a vaccine because it does elicit an immune response ultimately, and that's what vaccines do. So it is a vaccine. You may not agree with it. You may not like the way it goes, but it is a vaccine. Granted, it's a new type of vaccine we've never really done before, and that's what we're talking about. Well, now we're actually introducing this mRNA vaccine into beef and pork, to cows and pigs. And in that situation, the up in arms is actually more about the labeling. Look at this article. While states aim to approve mRNA vaccines into cattle and pigs, the Good Ranchers ban them. And they're saying they want 100% American meat with 0% mRNA vaccine. But one of the things they're talking about isn't simply about the vaccine, even though they don't want that in their beef and pork, but it's the product of USA labeling that they want to look at, saying that, oh, by the way, if you actually buy this beef at the grocery store, we have the right as individuals to know what we're eating. And if you want to actually have that beef, well, I like to have my beef mRNA vaccine free. I mean, it's people's choice. That's the way I see how things are in this country. And I think that's probably in Missouri the biggest thing that actually caused the up in arms. But what we're finding is this, and here's where it comes to be the misinformation. A lot of people are saying, oh, look, we're giving that mRNA vaccine to the beef, so now you eat the beef, you're trying to vaccinate me. Or same thing with pork. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's not the case. Because when it comes to proteins, it's very interesting how it works. Proteins are just long chains of amino acids. Here's one in a long chain. And the amino acids are what we need in our bloodstream for us to make our own proteins. So what do? We eat protein. So we munch on some beef, yum, 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 beef goes down. We have so many enzymes in our stomach, not only mention the stomach acid, but proteolytic enzymes that actually break down the proteins into the amino acids. Then we absorb those amino acids in our bloodstream, and we actually then reconnect them together to make whatever we want to do. Even if we just ate raw beef or raw pork, the odds of that messenger RNA going into, or the proteins it makes, by the way, going into your bloodstream is practically nil. Because our digestive system is designed to break things down so it doesn't get in your bloodstream like that. In fact, they would really like to make it so we can actually just ingest vaccines and the vaccines will go into our bloodstream, but with a very few rare exceptions, we can't do that because our stomach acid and all the enzymes will break it down and render it useless. The only true vaccines we actually have that you can ingest are vaccines to go against things in your digestive tract that don't have to pass over into your bloodstream. Do you understand that? So I want to first dispel this first rumor in thinking that they're trying to vaccinate us through our beef and pork. Again, even if you just ate the raw beef, but if you cook that beef, especially if you do it well done, there's no way that messenger RNA and those proteins it makes will survive in that cooking. It's not going to happen. So for you and me, if you know what, we get this beef from the grocery store, I'm not saying you still need to eat it, but let's say you want to eat it, just cook it thoroughly and you don't have to worry about that at all. You didn't have to worry about it before, but you definitely don't have to worry about it now. Okay. So that comes down to what are they trying to do? And this is actually where we're going to add on to this. So first of all, those YouTube channels that tell you, oh, they're trying to vaccinate us through the beef and pork, that's not true. It doesn't work that way. That's a lack of understanding. But are they trying to give us vaccines through our digestive tract? Maybe. Let's take a look at this next article. Recent developments in oral delivery of vaccines using nanocarriers. Now, if you want, I can read through this very scientific article for you, or I can explain it to you instead what's happening. So here's our key, here's our protein, or it could simply just be messenger RNA. How in the world can we take this, swallow it, and have it go in our bloodstream because our digestive system will break it down? They're called nanocarriers. And we actually have, I think, like 5 different ways of doing that now. But long story short, to make it easy, we have a way of actually producing a protective shell around this vaccine, around this mRNA, or around this protein, and make it so that when it goes to the digestive system, the digestive system can't break it down, and then boom, now it ends up in our bloodstream. That is the forefront of what they're working on right now. This is what they're trying. This is what they're shooting for. And this journal article practically just came out. Intraduodenal delivery of exosome-loaded SARS-CoV-2 RBD and mRNA induces a neutralizing antibody response in mice. Whoa. Same thing. I can go through this, or I can just click on this next article for layman's terms. Ready? The Chinese now can load cow's milk with mRNA exosomes, successfully immunizing mice. In other words, and listen, this is the forefront of technology right now. They've done it. They've actually produced what's called an exosome. An exosome is that little encapsulating thing going around the virus, or in this case, around mRNA. And the exosome is actually made of what's called a phospholipid bilayer. It's the same stuff your cell membrane's made out of. So you don't even need a receptor for this. Instead, that cell membrane will hit your cell and they'll fuse together and simply just release this into your cell. And now your cell uses that mRNA to make the proteins. They've just done this. The Chinese have just developed this technique. It's what they've been working on. Now, are we looking at introducing this into our beef and pork? No, this is literally forefront of technology. Are we looking at introducing this into our milk? Maybe, but it's not happening yet. This was just done. I mean, granted, we can talk about conspiracy. Maybe our government's been doing this for years. But I'll tell you right now, as a scientist, this is the forefront of technology. This is something that we have not been able to do yet, but now they're able to. So what we're seeing is this. I'm going to tell you right now, they're not using our beef and pork to give us mRNA or vaccines. They're not. They can't get past the digestive system, especially if you cook thoroughly your beef. Have that steak well done, it'll never happen. But the technology is now coming out where they can introduce it into milk, and the milk basically being a fatty liquid. That's actually what helps us out, by the way, just FYI, a science understanding. And it is just a matter of time before they're able to do this with other liquids as well. So it is coming. It is certainly coming. And of course, in the United States, we really fight against having things go against our will. So will they do it? Can they do it? I don't know. It's tough to say. But right now, at least right this second, be a little relieved and understand that they are not giving us vaccines through our beef and pork. It's not happening. That's not what's happening here, no matter what these other YouTube channels are saying. But I'm going to ask you, do you feel comfortable with that anyway? I'm not going to go ahead and give you my opinion. Are you okay eating a giant piece of steak that actually has been injected with a cow with messenger RNA vaccines? I'd like to see what you have, your thoughts on that in the comments below. And also, what are your thoughts on they're able to do it now in milk or other liquids? Do you think it's coming? I'm really wondering what you think about that. Thanks for watching.